Good evening, everybody. Our top stories: tensions between the United States and China escalating as President Trump and his administration insist on an America First foreign policy that includes fair trade, balanced trade, and respect for the U.S. and U.S. property throughout the world. China's President Xi Jinping and Vice President Mike Pence delivered dueling speeches in Asia over the weekend, presenting two very different views of global trade and security. We take that up. We discuss the latest in the U.S.-China relationship. China expert Gordon Chang with us. Also tonight, more unrest in Tijuana as Central American migrants are clashing with hundreds of local Mexican residents who don't want them in their city. President Trump remaining steadfast in his commitment to strong borders, warning those in the caravan not to try to enter the United States illegally.
We're not letting people into our country illegally, and we're not doing a release. We'll do a catch, but we're not doing releases. So if they think they're going to be released into our country like in the old days, like for years and years, they catch and release. We're not releasing. They don't get released.
We take up the latest in the situation south of our border. Fox reporter William LaJeunesse reporting tonight from Tijuana, and the Daily Caller's Vince Colanese join us. In California, 80 are dead. Nearly 1,000 people are still missing as the deadliest fire in the state's history continue to burn ahead of an expected rainstorm. We'll have the latest from California tonight. Our top story, a drop in the shares of Apple and other big tech, fueling a big sell-off on Wall Street today. The Dow Jones Industrials down almost 400 points. The S&P 500 down 46. The Nasdaq lost more than 200 points. And in the midst of the market turmoil, the White House continuing to demand fair trade policies from China ahead of an upcoming meeting that will take place between the president and Xi Jinping at the end of this month. Edward Lawrence in Washington with a story. Edward.
Yeah, Lou, trade fears part of that market drop. The breaking news tonight, the State Department spokeswoman reacted to harsh language by the Chinese without mentioning China following the Asian-Pacific Economic Cooperation Summit. Now, the statement tonight reads, the United States is proud to agree to promote free and fair trade in the region and combat unfair trade practices. It is unfortunate that not all economies, despite their rhetoric, could support these positions. Now, the Cooperation Summit failed to issue a joint statement for the first time in 29 years. China blames the U.S. for spoiling the summit. A spokesman for the Chinese Foreign Ministry saying it seemed like the U.S. attended this APEC meeting with great anger. Its speeches and remarks at the meeting openly caused controversy, created discord, spoiling the atmosphere of the meeting, and did not contribute to achieving consensus. Well, the vice president briefed the president today. This summit seemed to escalate the trade dispute towards a trade war as China continues with their trading practices. They are not changing. The Chinese delegation led by Vice Premier supposed to meet in Washington this week. They canceled again. These were prep talks related to the G20 summit bilateral meeting between President Xi Jinping and President Donald Trump. The Chinese say the meeting will happen after the bilateral on December 1st, assuming it goes well. Now, former FTC chairman under President Reagan says China should not underestimate President Trump.
Trump is a very good negotiator. He negotiated with the Canadians, and I think the Chinese should take a look at how we negotiated with the Canadians and get ready for more.
Now, the vice president told the Chinese the U.S. will not change course unless China changes their trading practices. The market reflected that in part with this hardening, part of the hardening tone with a sell-off. Lou?
Edward, thanks so much. It's hard some days to tell whether it's hardening or whether it's just an awakening on the part of the Chinese to the fact that this president means business.
Yeah, and resetting those fair trade deals.
Absolutely. And the international economic order in need of rebalancing across the entire breadth of those relationships. Edward, thank you very much. Edward Lawrence reporting from Washington. On the U.S. southern border tonight, Homeland Security officials say the caravan of Central American migrants consisting of nearly all single adult or teen males, and that at least 500 criminals have been identified among their ranks. There are now about 6,000 migrants seeking asylum in Tijuana, Mexico, that is from the United States. with thousands more expected to arrive behind them over the coming days. But as correspondent William LaJeunesse now reports, they aren't receiving a warm welcome at all from the locals.
Well, Lou, as you know, illegal immigration is not new to Mexico. Generations of Central Americans have used this country as a stepping stone into the United States. But this caravan, how they cross, the numbers, seem to have awakened a silent, now vocal minority against them.
Tension in Tijuana.
We are here because our government has not taken control of these, what we call invasions.
Shouting, "Hondurans go home" and "Viva Mexico," riot police Sunday stopped hundreds of Mexicans trying to storm the migrant shelter.
You see people, within the migrant caravan smoking weed, drinking, throwing rocks at the cops, causing chaos.
These Mexicans oppose illegal immigration and blame officials for allowing in thousands without papers. They fear crime, a loss of jobs, depressed wages, in a country where 40% already live in poverty.
I'm not really in favor of them coming the way they did. You know, to me, it feels like they invaded.
Nearby, a counter-protest. Supporters say Mexico should welcome and protect immigrants.
It's important that we consider that our Mexican brothers are also in the same situation.
The shelter Sunday remained on lockdown till protesters went home.
We are here for work, to have a better life, and no trouble, not troublemakers.
More than 6,000 caravan migrants arrived in Tijuana, their shelter looking now like a refugee camp, as many realize they cannot easily cross the border, and any asylum interview is at least 5 weeks away.
I tell them it's better for you to get a job and start working right, and then get out of your head trying to cross the border.
This morning, for the first time, the U.S. shut down the San Ysidro port of entry. Secretary Kirstjen Nielsen saying in a tweet, CBP believed a, quote, large number of caravan migrants plan to rush the border to gain illegal access to the U.S.
So by shutting down lanes and slowing traffic and increasing wait times, President Trump is sending a message to Mexico City that if you fail to stop these caravans on your southern border, you face consequences on the northern one. And Lou, he's doing it in a language that everyone understands. Time is money. Lou?
William, thank you very much. William LaJeunesse reporting from the San Ysidro port of entry. Rain headed for Northern California this week. Welcome rain, bringing conditions that could both help and hinder efforts to put out the deadly Camp Fire, which has left at least 77 people dead. Correspondent Claudia Cowan has the latest tonight from Chico, California.
It's a grim task, but it's necessary, and it really does, help families out because it allows them to know what happened, as difficult as it is.
The flames may have slowed, but the recovery from the devastating California wildfires is still in its early stages, with the death toll growing each day and the number of people unaccounted for constantly fluctuating.
Let's do this.
Now search crews are in a race against Mother Nature with rain in the forecast. While it will help put out the fire and improve air quality, rain could trigger mudslides and wash away the remains of those who died in the fire.
The weather that's expected is definitely going to impact operations. It's especially during the recovery, working with the Sheriff's Department and first responders. Again, we have additional resources out there really trying to work ahead of these storms.
With more than 50,000 left homeless by the Camp Fire, thousands are streaming through a disaster relief center trying to get their lives back together.
They can get initial financial support from FEMA if they qualify for federal assistance. They can get information. They can get their driver's license renewed. They can update their mailing address with the Postal Service. Social Security cards can be issued here.
An emotional vigil on Sunday night in Chico, California, where the community came together to heal and share stories of their escape.
We were basically a moving bomb because we had a bunch of propane tanks.
There was leaves falling down on fire on top of us. Propane tanks were blowing up. It was like a war zone.
Joe Florence and his family are thankful they made it out in time. And also for President Trump's visit here on Saturday.
I'm grateful for all the support that he's giving us. He didn't have to come here the way California's treated him, and he did. And for that, I'm very grateful.
And the federal aid that the president promised to help this community recover is flowing. More than $3.5 million is already in the hands of 13,000 households that have registered with FEMA here in Butte County. Those numbers will certainly grow. Lou?
Claudia, thank you very much. Claudia Cowan reporting from Chico, California. Still ahead here tonight, the White House has set new rules of conduct for journalists as the national left-wing media continues to attack President Trump rather than Jim Acosta's conduct.
Jim Acosta's fight for press freedom resulted in a resounding victory for the First Amendment.
The system worked. Checks and balances worked.
Having the press in the White House is actually more of a benefit to the White House. So maybe the Trump administration is a little worried about cutting off that tool.
This is about a slippery slope. This is about what other reporters could be targeted by this White House.
I don't even think Donald Trump understands the definition of decorum.
We're watching the rageaholic president at a point of his greatest rage and who it's at. And his greatest rage is at the press.
We'll take that up with attorneys Harmeet Dillon and Greg Jarrett. But up next, new signs that tariffs on Chinese exports to the United States are working, and working very well. Asia expert Gordon Chang joins me to talk about the president's winning strategy and the threat of communist China. When we continue, stay with us. A new report that demonstrates clearly President Trump is succeeding in making China pay for most of the trade tariffs. European researchers now saying American consumers and companies are absorbing only 4.5% of those tariffs, of the 25% imposed on $250 billion of Chinese goods. The remaining 80% of those tariffs are being paid by China. And joining me now to talk about the very tense U.S.-China relationship, and one that doesn't seem to be improving, Gordon Chang, author of The Coming Collapse of China and the Nuclear Showdown. Gordon, good to have you here, and welcome back from Tokyo. Good to see you. Let's start with first these targeted tariffs that the president has implemented, and more to follow if the Chinese do not come to their senses. I mean, this has to shock places like Goldman Sachs and the establishment forces that have been lobbying against these tariffs. Your thoughts?
All the smart people who talked about how the American consumer was going to be the one paying for all the tariffs, well, they're wrong. And this is because the administration obviously picked out those areas where there was a lot of elasticity, and that's good. You know, the important thing is that...
There goes Gordon using the economics word. I was just saying today, very few people talk about the elasticity, that is the ability to substitute goods or to delay purchasing them based on price.
Yeah, the important thing here is that when you look at the broader picture of the tariffs and the other things that the Trump administration is doing, is he's actually encouraging supply chains to get out of China. Right. And that's important for us because those supply chains are held hostage by Beijing. Whenever they get upset about something, and it's often not about trade, they go against our companies.
And sometimes we use the words supply chains are used too liberally when the word really is production of products themselves in China, and a dependence upon China for that production. That's got to change, obviously, as you say. Some other things have got to change. One is it's a communist government. They have expansionist, and that's being kind. They have colonial, it seems at times, but certainly imperial imperatives within their foreign policy that they seem to be shocked that an American president would resist, as this one has.
Yeah. Well, Xi Jinping, for more than a decade, has been dropping hints that China is the world's only sovereign state. And this is just basically what he's saying is that Americans, Japanese, whatever, you know, are just mere subjects to the greater glory of the Chinese court. You know, the important thing for us is that those trade that we have, you know, our factories in China are producing profits that China is then using to put into its military, which is configuring itself to fight Americans. And so there's a long chain here, and it's not just economics. It's also, of course, security, because China needs an enemy, and they've identified us.
Well, they've identified us. We shouldn't have been too hard to spot because we are the only superpower in the world. This is a country under this president that is not recognizable to the power structure in Beijing, is it?
No. One thing that President Trump has done, especially this year, is he's taken actions to defend the American economy, defend American society. Chinese leaders don't know how to deal with this. So they try to talk to Henry Kissinger. They go try to talk to the heads of financial companies. And nothing
the establishment. Wall Street has been carrying out what the vice president referred to as a lobbying exercise, calling Wall Street and American CEOs participating in the Chinese call for discussions and talks unregistered foreign agents. And by God, that's exactly what they are. And kudos to the vice president for saying it exactly the way it is.
Yes. And, you know, we saw that September 16th meeting in Beijing before the midterms. Obviously, the Chinese were trying to use the heads of the big financial
they
banks,
still are
against the United States. And it didn't work. And right now, the people in Beijing
well, it hasn't
are
worked
scratching their
so
head.
far, only because the CEOs didn't take them up on the offer, but they dispatched their minions from the, in some cases, from the C-level offices of their banks and firms. You know, this is an ugly thing we're watching. We're watching propaganda being organized against this president's policies. We're watching the establishment try to subvert the president's policies on China, on international trade, and the idea that this stuff that's been circulating from the establishment, whether it's at the Council of Foreign Relations or it's the Chamber of Commerce, Wall Street, you know, we need quick wins here after the midterms. Well, the president's got a quick win. He won the Senate, for crying out loud. He is accomplishing more, and now they want to try to talk their way, insinuate themselves into this president's administration, and to get him to, in some cases, dilute or even abandon policies that are certain to be effective.
You know, the most important thing here is that these tariffs that people talk about, they're imposed under Section 301 of the Trade Act of 1974 as a remedy for the theft of intellectual property. The NSA last week just came out with a report said that China's theft of U.S. IP for commercial purposes is actually increased over the last year. We saw that report just a couple days.
When's the last time you heard of one of the front companies being shut down by either the FBI or any intelligence operation of this agency of this country? You haven't. You haven't heard it. We know that for years they've been operating, literally thousands of front companies working through our universities as well to what? Gather intellectual property by the hundreds of billions of dollars they steal every year.
We just got that report that Micron Technology, their most recent chip, has been completely stolen by the Chinese. That was $8.95 billion worth of IP, just one theft, and it's occurring across the board, Lou.
And these idiots, and I will call them what they are, they're traitors to the United States. Every one of these people trying to reverse this president's policies vis-a-vis Beijing are betraying this country, and they're doing so for the most sordid of reasons, and that is their own commercial interest. Gordon, great to see you. Thanks for being here.
Thanks, Lou.
As always. Gordon Chang. Be sure to vote on our poll tonight. The question is, do you believe Communist China finally comprehends President Trump's America First trade policies and demand for balanced fair trade? And an end to China's theft of U.S. technology is now non-negotiable. Cast your vote on Twitter at Lou Dobbs. Follow me on Twitter at Lou Dobbs as always. Like me on Facebook. Follow me on Instagram at Lou Dobbs Tonight. Up next, the White House unveiling a new code of conduct for the White House press corps. Oh, that's going to make a few of them very uncomfortable. Journalists with the national left-wing media must act like adults. Do you think they can do that? Is this a fair set of guidelines? We take that up and more right after the break. Harmeet Dillon and Greg Jarrett join me. Stay with us. We'll be right back. The White House today outlining new rules for presidential news conference. The White House has dropped its effort to remove the hard pass of CNN reporter Jim Acosta. The rules include limiting journalists to one question each, follow-ups at the discretion of the president, and the letter warned, should you refuse to follow these rules in the future, we will take action. Well, joining me now to take up all of this, the fight over the acting attorney general and more, Harmeet Dillon, attorney, RNC committee woman for the great state of California. Great to have you with us. Greg Jarrett, Fox legal analyst, author of the New York Times bestseller, The Russia Hoax, and always good to have you with us. Harmeet, let me begin with you. These rules tonight, and if we could, let's put those up full screen just for a second. These look pretty simple, straightforward. Does this meet the test of due process that Judge Kelly asserted?
Well, it's step one in the due process. First, you have to have the rules announced in advance, and then you have to have a warning and notice an opportunity to be heard and respond. So I do think it satisfies the due process, and now it remains to be seen whether Acosta is going to carry out his part, which is either behaving or being able to justify his actions. And if he toes the line as a result of this, then everybody will be better off, and we won't have anything to worry about. But if he doesn't or somebody else doesn't, then yes, the White House has the right to institute proceedings, give them an opportunity to respond, and then take a final action.
Your thoughts?
There have always been rules of decency and decorum that White House correspondents have always practiced. When I was there temporarily, I knew the rules. I abided by the rules. Then it comes along guys like Jim Acosta, and they think they have the right to be rude and abrasive and obnoxious and commandeer the news conference and argue with the president and prevent his colleagues from posing their questions.
You have to believe that they're a little upset, the White House press corps, that he has messed it up for them.
Yeah, and if I were press secretary, what I would do is the next time Acosta pulls that, I would say, that's the end of the news conference, not only today, but the rest of the week.
That's what the president said he will do.
And his colleagues, Acosta's colleagues, would have surrounded him and threatened to tar and feather him and kick him out. And that is the most effective way to get rid of that kind of conduct.
Let's be honest here. I want to ask you both this. Why isn't there a time where you have to just tell a district court judge to go to hell? Because I mean, the idea that you have to follow the dicta of a district court judge and create rules and can't run the White House in the way that it has been run since time immemorial. Harmeet?
Well, Lou, to be fair to the judge, if you read his ruling from the bench, it seems clear that he felt that he was constrained by a prior decision of the court,
that's
which
patent
said that
nonsense. That was a 1977. Excuse me, Harmeet. That was an idiotic, in my opinion, ruling. This judge took a case in which you're dealing with a Nation reporter. It wasn't about anything but his politics. It had nothing to do with conduct. It had nothing to do with decorum and disrupting a presidential press conference. It wasn't on point at all, in my opinion. You guys are the lawyers,
right.
but
well, Your question was, should we tell the judge to go to hell? And the answer is that's generally not a good idea. And I do think that norms announced in advance, even though they're obvious, like, you shouldn't have to tell people to behave like adults. But now that we have that rule,
you shouldn't have to tell a district court judge to get back in your bailiwick either. What do you think?
You're absolutely right. When you are there's no freedom to be obnoxious and rude. There's no freedom of the press to question the president. It's a privilege to be there at the White House, and there are rules and norms that have always been followed. And now you've got a judge who has decided to expand due process beyond any resemblance of its original intent.
President of the United States how
and I agree with you. I would tell the judge, go to hell. We're going to practice the way we want. Let the Supreme Court decide it if necessary.
Let me turn very quickly to the president prepared to give his written answers to Robert Mueller. Let's take his comments to Chris Wallace yesterday, if we could, please.
The questions were asked and answered. It wasn't a big deal. They make it like I had meetings for many, many hours. I got the questions. I responded. We wrote them out. I read them once. I read them a second time. We made some changes. That's it. I think that should solve the problem. I hope it solves the problem. If it doesn't, I'll be told and we'll make a decision at that time. But probably this is the end.
There's the president. Harmeet, is this the end, in your best judgment?
Well, I think it should be the end from the president's side. I think this is handled correctly, and this is the extent of his involvement in this. Now, who knows what Mueller is going to do with this, and there may be a second round. This may attempt to go on forever, but I hope that this puts a rest to it, and this is the appropriate way to handle it, given how busy the president is.
All right. Greg?
With obstruction off the table, answer the questions. I don't know anything about collusion. I don't know anybody else in my campaign who knew or colluded with Russia. End of story. And you can dismiss allegations of the Trump Tower meeting. Did Trump know in advance? I did not. He said that repeatedly. Did you mislead anyone in your dictated statement? It was accurate to the best of my knowledge. So, I mean, those are the main questions. They should be easy to answer.
And after over 2 years of investigating this president and his administration, enough is enough is enough. It's actually far more than enough.
Right.
Harmeet Dillon, Greg Jarrett, thank you both for being with us tonight. Thank you.
Thanks, Lou.
Up next, after nearly 2 weeks, the results are settled in Florida. It's two victories for the president and the Republicans. The Senate majority for the Republicans is growing. We take that up and more with the dynamic duo, Diamond and Silk, joining us tonight. Stay with us. We'll be right back. On Wall Street today, a big sell-off. The Dow losing almost 400 points. The S&P lost 46. The Nasdaq down 219. Volume on the big board, 3.7 billion shares. Facebook, Apple, Netflix, Google parent, Alphabet, all dropping into bear market territory. Closing out the day, Facebook stock plummeted, heading into 2019. The company's stock losing 5%, hitting its lowest level since February of 2017. Facebook on track for its longest quarterly losing streak since 2013. Apple CEO Tim Cook weighing in on the possibility that Congress will regulate big tech. Here he is.
Generally speaking, I am not a big fan of regulation. I'm a big believer in the free market. But we have to admit when the free market's not working. And it hasn't worked here. And I think it's inevitable that there will be some level of regulation.
The president has said as much. The president making it very clear that he is not thrilled with monopolistic powers or the oligopolies that have formed in technology. A reminder, listen to my reports 3 times a day, coast to coast on the Salem Radio Network. Embattled controversial election supervisor of Broward County, Florida, has produced a suitable ending. Brenda Snipes has resigned. Snipes facing criticism for her failure to comply with Florida law in the 2018 midterms after years of incompetence and skullduggery. President Trump called for her to be fired just days ago. Her resignation takes effect. Are you ready? She's a lame duck. Her resignation effective in January, taking a page out of, well, someone we all know's book. Joining me now, social media superstars, President Trump's most loyal supporters, Diamond and Silk. Great to have you with us. Let me start by asking you, will there be now national left-wing media focus on the fact this president has achieved a terrific victory for the U.S. Senate, enlarging the GOP majority?
It should be. They should focus on that. But you know they're not. What they will focus on, the left-wing media, is start throwing the racist word around, or this is racist, or somebody is being racist towards me. I absolutely love, and I'm so thrilled that Brenda Snipes, that she's stepping down. Yes. She should have been fired a long time ago, because if you look at what she did in this whole process, is what they were trying to do. They were doing a rehearsal, getting prepared for the 2020 run. That's right. It was going to be the art of the steal, and I want everybody, I don't care what side of the aisle you're on, to look at that. When you break our election laws and do what you want to and not answer questions that should be answered, that's right, you're trying to take something, you're trying to steal. But she should have been fired a long time ago.
You know, Governor-elect DeSantis saying that there was no way that she was going to be the election supervisor through another election. I'm amazed that they put up with the shenanigans. I'm being very kind, the cheating and the stealing in that elections office for as long as they did. The White House press corps, let's turn there. New rules. We can call them the, I don't know what, the Acosta rules. I don't know what you would want to call them. In which the whole press corps gets to ask one question. They've got to be civil, and they've got to be kind of focused on their manners. What do you think?
Well, listen, I absolutely love it. I think Acosta, if he wants to be respected as a journalist, he has to respect the White House and respect the president. He's going to have to do that. No more acting like a baby. No more wanting to suck on your pacifier. We're not going to put you in timeout. If you defy the rules, you're going to get thrown out, not in timeout, but up out that White House, and your press credentials are going to be taken again.
So the bottom line is this, Lou. If you act like a child, you will be treated like a child.
I think
bottom line.
And certainly in the presence of the President of the United States and in the White House itself, I would think that would come as second nature to any American. Let me turn first to, if in terms of foreign policy, a president who has introduced the entire country and all of our trading partners to an extraordinary concept. We're going to have balanced trade. You're not going to steal from us by the hundreds of billions of dollars a year anymore. Specifically, that case obviously fits China. They're behaving like children. They want to be able to keep stealing, and they think that we should be subsidizing their economy and buying their products, no matter what the impact is on our workers and our corporations. Your thoughts about the Chinese having just a bit of a fit over this insistence by the president?
Well, they're going to have to stop having this little hissy fit. Because you have a new sheriff in town. It's President Donald Trump, and he's a businessman. And it's going to be fair and equal trade across the board. You're not going to steal from us, and they're going to have to get that through their head. And President Trump is not going to waver, nor is he going to back down. I know that they're used to dealing with weak presidents like President Obama and the rest of them, but you have a strong president that's not going to tolerate it.
And you have a strong president that's putting American first, baby. It's about America, because charity starts at home, not abroad.
Thank you so much for being with us. It's always great to see you, my friends. Thanks so much. Diamond and Still. All the best. Well, Pope Francis dining with 1,500 people, poor people, in the Vatican over the weekend. And there he decried the plight of the indigent. As he addressed the crowd, Pope Francis lamented the poor are weeping, quote, while the wealthy few feast on what injustice belongs to all. Injustice is the perverse root of poverty. Up next, there could be fewer U.S. troops along our southern border with Mexico. Are you ready for this? Already we're hearing from a general about troop levels. The caravan has arrived in Tijuana, thousands more expected. What is going on? We take up these latest developments with the Daily Caller's Vince Colanese when we return. Stay with us. The Pentagon may begin scaling back the troops posted along our border with Mexico as early as this week. The Army commander overseeing the mission, Lieutenant General Jeffrey Buchanan, telling Politico the mission's end date remains December 15th, that all of the active duty troops who were sent to the border could be home by Christmas, despite the expected arrival of thousands more in caravans at the southern border in the days and weeks ahead. According to a new poll from Monmouth University, more than half of Americans see the migrant caravans moving toward the country as a threat to the United States. In the poll released today, nearly a third of them see the caravans as a major threat. And the same poll found 7 in 10 Americans see illegal immigration as a serious issue. Joining us tonight to discuss the caravan, Jim Acosta's new rules, and the sore losers in the Democratic Party, the Daily Caller's editorial director, Vince Colanese. Good to have you with us, Vince.
Nice to be here, Lou. Thank you.
Let's start with this unexpected announcement that troops may apparently be withdrawn very quickly from the border.
Yeah, I thought an underlying principle of the Trump administration is that we don't broadcast our intentions with our military ahead of time. We have to keep people guessing for national security reasons, and that's not what's happening here. I think what you're pointing out is that it's a bit of a bizarre messaging to say, hey, the troops are going to be away from the border by Christmas, and if you are if you're looking to illegally immigrate into the United States, you now have a timeline by which to do that. So I think that's a bit uninspired to be giving those sorts of answers, whether or not you intend to actually do it.
This Lieutenant General, who I haven't heard of before, but that doesn't mean anything necessarily, had to surely understand this is a political question of great sensitivity, and that he would be very wise indeed to not speak to it without White House approval. In fact, insisting, I would think, for his own career, that it come from the White House.
Well, it's clearly an issue of sincere concern to the President of the United States, so that would be my first thought, too. What does the White House think of this statement I'm about to make? And I think what you're seeing, if I'm just making a prediction here, holding out my finger to the wind, it looks like the military is succumbing a bit to the liberal media pressure on this question. This idea, you saw the New York Times run this big story, the troops are out there, they're going to miss holidays. They signed up to defend our country. They signed up for our national security. And one of the paramount concerns is the integrity of our borders. These men and women on the border doing the job they were asked to do by their commander-in-chief. And yet the New York Times is coming at it from the perspective of how dare they even be a part of this. And I think the military is coming to that a little bit by broadcasting this idea that, oh, don't worry, everyone will be home by Christmas. There won't be military on the border to assist the Border Patrol. Not a good message to send when you have so many illegal immigrants knocking on the door.
No matter what, there's a serious problem in the Pentagon, because once again, Mattis, the defense secretary, is putting himself in, at this point, what appears to be opposition to the commander-in-chief. And it is stunning stuff to witness.
And General Mattis went to the border this week with Kirstjen Nielsen this past week to actually survey the activity of the troops. It's nice to see him out there. I think that's a good thing, encouraging the troops. And that's the key here. And look, the reason those troops are on the border is to assist the Border Patrol in its very tall task. I mean, you look at this migrant caravan that's standing in Tijuana right now, that is not even the start of it. Think back to October. You know this really well, Lou. Nearly 60,000 people were arrested or turned back at the border with the United States and Mexico. That's a record. Continuing every day. Caravans, forget caravans. We have a caravan coming every day into the United States of America.
And let me turn to the White House, since we're on that subject, and that is the new rules announced by Sarah Sanders today, the new rules for journalists in the White House press corps.
Yes.
One question, behave yourself. We'll see how things go, is my summation. Your reaction to these new Acosta rules?
Oh, look, and that's the key. That's the key right there. This is Jim Acosta's fault. The reality is, if you're a member of that press corps, if you're in that White House press briefing room, yes, of course you're standing up alongside your fellow reporter, arguing for the most amount of time to ask questions that you can possibly get. But here's the key. Jim Acosta, by virtue of the debate he held with the President of the United States, not questioning, a debate, he started out by saying he wanted to challenge the President on a talking point. That's not the role. The role is to get information out of the President for the American people. And he failed in that core test. And in so doing, he made it worse for the entire press corps, because now they have restrictive rules on their ability to ask follow-up questions, all courtesy of one man, Jim Acosta.
Well, one man and one organization. You go to Jeff Zucker at CNN, then you go to the parent, Time Warner, and then you go to the parent of the parent, which is AT&T. And the reality is we're watching corporate behemoths direct the conduct of a Jim Acosta.
Yes.
There's a purpose in it, and no one should mistake that. We're watching Comcast when it comes to NBC. I mean, it goes on and on. These are corporate journalists behaving that way, obviously at the direction of their corporations.
Well, if you want to do something fun, or if your viewers ever want to basically take a look at like how that White House press briefing room was actually composed and who gets paid by whom in that room, look no further than the first couple rows. Fox has a couple of reporters by virtue of Fox News Radio and Fox News and Fox Business, of course, but those are individual networks. What you have in that room are Washington Post reporters, New York Times reporters. The first couple rows, they're all paid by CNN and MSNBC. They're paid contributors to those networks. In other words, those two lefty networks have control, are paying a huge percentage of the major figures who are in that press briefing. That is a very real conflict of interest.
A conflict of interest, and one you would think that the White House would want to examine very carefully. The issue of Acosta, the CNN, I just have to think that the White House press corps is beside itself with these rules coming down, all because of the way Acosta behaved and, did so with You know, I mean, it just doesn't make any sense to me.
Unquestionably. But one of the lessons I take from this is, like, the seething hatred for the Trump White House must be so great in that room that they're willing to tolerate the insanity of Jim Acosta, which strikes me as the most bizarre thing ever. At some point, they have to tap out and you go, you know what, Jim Acosta, you are poorly serving our ability to actually ask questions of the White House.
And I don't suppose that would be possibly part of the White House strategy to make certain that they become self-policing and self-aware. Vince Colanese,
some of that.
Great to have you with us. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Lou.
Up next, more on the migrant caravan as they find out what happens in Tijuana. The Mexican people weren't too thrilled with them, and they are the ones protesting illegal immigrants, not on this side of the border. Stay with us. We'll be right back.